The slap cracked through the air like a gunshot. Nasara didn't fall. She stood there, one hand slowly rising to her cheek, dark eyes steady, spine straight. The red mark bloomed across her face like a brand, and still she did not move. The woman who struck her, Petra Voss, draped in imported silk and dripping with borrowed authority, pulled her wrist back like she was considering doing it again. "You broke my grandmother's vase," Petra hissed. "Do you understand what that means? Do you even understand the word irreplaceable?" Nasara's voice came out calm, almost dangerously calm. "I didn't touch the vase, ma'am." Another flash of Petra's eyes, another step forward. "Are you calling me a liar in my own home?" And here is where the story truly begins, because this was not Petra's home. It had never been Petra's home. The penthouse on the 40th floor of the Voss Tower in Osaka belonged to one man, and that man had not been seen in 3 days. Until the elevator doors opened. Before we continue, drop a comment right now, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, subscribe, let's see how global this story reaches. The sound of the elevator was always distinct in that penthouse. Low, mechanical, precise, like a held breath finally released. Ryuken Voss walked in, and he did not look like a man who had been traveling. He looked like a man who had been at war. His jacket was impeccable, yes. The silver cufflinks caught the light, yes. But his eyes, dark, measuring, still, swept the room in under 2 seconds and landed immediately on Nasara's face. On the mark on her cheek. He said nothing for a moment. That was the most terrifying thing about Ryuken Voss. His silences had weight. Petra turned, and her expression shifted from fury to relief in an instant. "Ryuken, finally, this woman broke." "Nasara," his voice cut across the room like a wire pulled taut, "come here." Nasara crossed the floor without hesitation. She stopped 2 feet in front of him, and he reached out one hand, tilting her chin gently to the side to examine her cheek. His jaw tightened. It was the only visible sign of what was moving through him. He released her, then he turned to Petra. "Leave this house," he said quietly. Petra blinked. "Excuse me." "I will not repeat it." "Ryuken, I am your cousin's wife. I came here to." "You came here without invitation." His voice had not risen. It never needed to. "You struck a member of my household. You are standing in a home that does not belong to you, issuing ultimatums to a woman who has more dignity in one moment of silence than you have ever possessed." He paused. "Security will escort you down. If your husband calls me to complain, I will remind him of every favor he owes me. He will not call twice." Petra's face turned colors, crimson, then white, then something close to understanding, the kind that comes too late and costs too much. She left without another word. Nasara was 26 years old, and she had worked in the Voss household for 14 months. She had learned quickly that Ryuken Voss was not what the world believed him to be. The world believed he was a businessman, import and export rare materials, private logistics. His name was in financial journals, occasionally in the society pages when he couldn't avoid it. He was the kind of wealthy that did not need to announce itself, clean edges, quiet power. But Nasara had grown up in a family of watchers. Her grandmother back in Kano used to say that the truth of any man lives not in his words but in the space between them. Nasara had spent 14 months watching the space between Ryuken Voss's words. She had seen the men who came to the back entrance at odd hours. The conversations in languages she wasn't supposed to understand, but did, because she had learned Japanese in university and Ryuken had never bothered to ask. She had seen the deference in the eyes of people who should have had no reason to show deference to a man who claimed to merely move cargo across borders. She knew what he was. Or rather, she knew what the shape of him suggested. The Voss name in Osaka was not simply a family name, it was a territory. She was rinsing the mark on her cheek with cold water when he knocked on the open doorframe of the kitchen. He was still in his travel jacket. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him in the mirror's reflection. "You didn't strike me. Petra was in this house, that is my failure, not yours." Nasara dried her face slowly. "Your housekeeper let her in, she said your cousin's wife had access." "She did, past tense." He moved to the counter, poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher and set one near her, not pushed toward her, just placed, like an offering she could refuse. She didn't refuse it. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question surprised her, not because it was unexpected from a decent employer. But because of how he asked it, without performance, without the clipped efficiency he usually used for anything resembling personal conversation. "I'm fine," she said, then quietly, "Thank you for what you did." He nodded once. He started to leave. "Mr. Voss," she didn't know why she said it. She said the vase was her grandmother's. He paused at the doorway, a beat of silence. Then something happened to his face, not quite a smile but the ghost of one. "The vase she was referring to has been in storage since my mother placed it there 8 years ago. Petra has never been in this apartment long enough to know where the storage room is." Nasara turned to look at him fully. "She wanted a reason," she said. He held her gaze. "People like Petra always do." He left. Nasara stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her cold glass of water sweating in her hand, something turning slowly in her chest like a key she hadn't known existed. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them, not dramatically, not obviously. The way weather shifts imperceptibly until you realize one morning that the temperature has completely changed. Ryuken began coming home at consistent hours. He had not done this in the first year of her employment. He began eating dinner at the table instead of in his office. He asked her opinion on small things, which of 2 meeting venues she thought had better acoustics, whether the east or west balcony had better light in the evenings. She answered honestly, always. That was the thing about Nasara, she had never learned to soften her opinions into shapes that were easier to swallow. Her mother called it her greatest flaw. Her university professors had called it her greatest asset. She had spent her life not knowing which of them was right. Ryuken seemed to find it refreshing. "You disagree with me?" he said one evening. They had been discussing, of all things, the renovation of the building's lobby. She had said the proposed design was cold and uninviting, and he had initially defended it. "I do," she said simply. "Most people don't. Most people need something from you." He was quiet. "And you don't." "I need my salary and a safe place to live." She looked at him steadily. "Those are already being provided." He laughed. It came out like it surprised him, short, genuine, and low. The kind of laugh a person makes when they have forgotten they're capable of it. The crisis came on a Thursday. Nasara was returning from the market when she saw the black car parked too deliberately outside the building's side entrance. She noticed the angle. The window rolled down 2 inches despite the cold, the second car idling at the corner with its lights off. She walked past. She went up the back stairwell, something she had never done, and arrived on the 40th floor through the service corridor. Ryuken was in his study on the phone. His voice was low and controlled, which meant it was serious. She knocked twice, fast, the code that his head of household staff used for non-emergency urgent messages. He opened the door himself, which he almost never did. She told him what she saw, calmly, precisely: vehicle positions, estimated sightlines, the window angle. He stared at her. "How do you know what a surveillance formation looks like?" he asked. She met his eyes. "The same way I know what you are, Mr. Voss, because I've been paying attention." The silence that fell between them was different from all the previous silences. It was the silence of 2 people standing on opposite sides of a door that has just been opened. Neither of them could pretend it was still closed. He spoke first. "Are you afraid of me?" She thought about it genuinely. "No. You should be." "Probably," she agreed, "but fear has never been very useful to me." He studied her for a long moment, then he picked up his phone and made 3 calls in under 2 minutes. By the time the 3rd call ended, the black car outside was gone. She didn't ask how, he didn't explain. What he did instead was sit across from her in the study and, for the first time in 14 months, speak to her as an equal. His real name was Ryuken Voss. The Arata half was Japanese, his mother's family, one of the oldest organizational lineages in Kansai. The Voss half was his father's Dutch-German extraction, old European money that had grown complicated over generations. He had inherited 2 worlds. He had not chosen either of them. "My mother died when I was 19, he said. They were still in the study. The city glittered 40 floors below. The organization passed to me because there was no one else positioned to hold it. I spent 3 years believing I could redirect it, legitimize it, slowly." "Did you?" "Parts of it," he leaned back, "enough to sleep, not enough to feel clean." Nasara was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Because you already know the shape of it, he said, and you haven't run. She looked at the city lights. Running has never solved anything for me either. What Nasara had never told him, what she had never told anyone in that building, was that she had not taken the position in his household by accident. She had a cousin, Dada, who had worked as a driver for a subsidiary of the Voss organization 3 years ago. Dada had disappeared, not violently, not clearly. He had simply stopped answering calls 1 month, and by the next month his apartment had been emptied. Her family believed Dada had gotten entangled in something and had been made to disappear. Nasara had come to Osaka to find out what had happened to him. 14 months of watching, 14 months of access to a world most people never saw, and she had found nothing, no evidence of harm, no records of coercion, only a gap where a person used to be. She told Ryuken this. She didn't know why she chose that night. Perhaps because he had been honest with her and the weight of carrying a secret inside someone else's secret had become unbearable. He was still for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed to his desk, and opened a drawer. He removed a single envelope and placed it on the desk between them. Dada Aliyu, he said, your cousin. She stared at the envelope, her hands had gone cold. Open it, he said. Inside was a photograph of Dada, alive, standing outside what looked like a small shipping office, squinting in sunlight, holding a coffee cup with his whole hand the way he always had, the way their grandmother used to scold him for. Below the photograph was an address, Fukuoka. Nasara's throat tightened. He's alive. He came to me 3 years ago with a problem, Ryuken said. A debt, not to my organization, to another one, the kind that doesn't negotiate. I moved him, changed his documentation, set him up somewhere quiet under a name that would keep him safe. He paused. I couldn't tell his family without creating a thread someone could follow back to him. She was trembling slightly. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. Why didn't you tell me when I started working here? I didn't know who you were when you started working here. His voice was careful. I found out 6 months in. She looked up and then I had to decide whether you were here to investigate me or to find him. Which did you decide? Something moved through his expression. Both, and that somehow made you more trustworthy, not less. Nasara laughed. It came out broken and then it came out real. She pressed the photograph against her chest and laughed until her eyes were wet, and Ryuken stood across the desk from her looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just been given permission to set it down. 3 days later, she traveled to Fukuoka. Dada opened the door of his small apartment and stood there blinking at her for 5 full seconds before his face collapsed, and he grabbed her in a hug so fierce she lost her breath. They sat on his tiny balcony and drank tea and talked until midnight. He was different, quieter but safe, and he was genuinely, completely safe. On the train back to Osaka, Nasara stared out the window at the dark countryside rushing past and tried to understand what she was feeling. She had come to Osaka to find the truth. She had found it. The assignment, if she had ever really called it that in her own mind, was finished. She could leave. The thought sat in her chest and she examined it honestly. She could leave. There was nothing keeping her. She was not naive about what Ryuken was. She was not pretending that the organization he headed was harmless or that the choices he had made and continued to make were simply gray areas she could smooth over with fondness. But she also knew what she had seen in him, the way he had turned to face Petra without hesitation, the way he had placed a glass of water near her hand without pushing it toward her, the 3 phone calls and the cars that disappeared, the photograph in the drawer, kept, held, not discarded. The laugh that had come out of him like something he'd forgotten he owned. She came back. She walked into the penthouse and he was standing in the kitchen, a place she had almost never seen him, attempting, with admirable seriousness, to make tea. He had gotten the temperature wrong and the leaves had gone bitter, and he was staring at the cup with the expression of a man who had outmaneuvered enemies across 3 continents and could not defeat an electric kettle. She took the cup from him. She started over. He's well, she said. I know, a pause. I had a message sent to confirm your arrival. She glanced at him sideways. You were worried. I am occasionally capable of concern. She smiled at the kettle. I'm going to stay, she said. She felt him go still behind her. Nasara. I'm not naive. She turned to face him, holding both cups now. I know what this life contains. I know it isn't clean. I know there are parts of it I'll never see and parts I'll probably wish I hadn't. She held out his cup. But I've never built anything by running from complexity, and I don't intend to start. He took the cup, his fingers brushed hers, neither of them pulled away. I should tell you, he said quietly, that I am not an easy man to be close to. I've noticed. I have enemies. I've noticed that too. I am not, he stopped, started again. I don't know how to do this without putting you at risk. She looked at him, at the city. At the man who ran a shadow empire from a glass tower and kept a photograph of a young man he'd protected in his desk drawer without ever asking for thanks. Then we figure it out carefully, she said, together. They did. It was not a fairy tale. There were nights she sat awake turning over the weight of what his world contained. There were days he kept her at a distance because the edges of his work were too sharp and he could not bring himself to have her close to them. There were arguments, real ones, not the decorative kind. She had opinions and she gave them without decoration. He was not accustomed to being pushed back against, and the first time she walked out of a room rather than concede a point she was wrong about, he stood there so stunned that his head of security asked if he needed a doctor. But there were also mornings on the east balcony with better light. There were evenings he came home and laughed without being surprised by it. There was the day she sat across from him in a meeting. She had been folding linens nearby and wandered close when things grew tense, and she said one quiet sentence to the man across the table that reframed the entire negotiation, and afterward, Ryuken looked at her with an expression she had no name for yet. She learned one eventually. The Petra situation resolved itself in the manner such things usually do when powerful people are involved, quietly, completely, and with paperwork. Petra had apparently struck a member of the Voss household before, twice. Both times the staff in question had been afraid to report it. When Ryuken's household director compiled the full account, Ryuken handled it with the same quiet efficiency he handled everything. Petra's access was permanently revoked. Her husband, Ryuken's cousin, was informed that this was not a negotiable matter, and that his marriage was his business, but his wife's behavior in Voss properties was Ryuken's. The cousin wisely agreed. The staff, 5 people total who had suffered Petra's behavior in silence, received formal acknowledgement and an adjustment in their terms. Nasara was not in the room when Ryuken made those arrangements, but the household director told her about it 3 days later, eyes suspiciously bright. He said no one working under his roof should ever feel unprotected, the director told her. He said it like it was obvious, like it had always been the rule. Nasara thought about that for a long time. Dada visited Osaka 6 months later when it was safe. He and Ryuken met in a room Nasara was not in. She had not asked to be. Some conversations needed to happen between the people who had been in them from the beginning. When Dada came out, he looked at Nasara for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Dada tilted his head, honestly worse and also somehow less. She understood that. She had expected those same things. What Ryuken Voss was turned out to be more specific, more contradictory, and more real than any version she could have invented. That was, she had come to understand, the thing about truth. It was always stranger and somehow more bearable than the story you told yourself in the dark. On the night that would have been her 2-year anniversary in the household, she no longer thought of herself as staff. She had not for some time, though the technical arrangements had quietly evolved to reflect that. Ryuken took her to the rooftop. Not dramatically. He just said, "Come," and she came. Osaka spread out below them in every direction. The lights of the harbor, the pale suggestions of mountains in the north, whined off the bay carrying salt and diesel and the faint brightness of a city that never fully slept. He handed her a small box, not wrapped, not ceremonially presented, just placed in her hands the way he had once placed a glass of water near her, like an offering, like something she could refuse. Inside was a key to the apartment. An apartment key, not a grand gesture, not a ring, nothing that demanded an answer before she was ready to give one, just a key. Straightforward, like him when he was being most himself. She turned it in her fingers. "You should know," she said, "that I'll rearrange your east office. The light is wrong in the mornings." "I know," he said, "I've been waiting for you to do it." She looked at him. He was watching the city with that expression she'd finally found a name for, the one that had taken her almost 2 years to read. It was not contentment exactly. It was something harder one than contentment. It was the face of a man who had stopped expecting peace and had been quietly stunned to find it anyway. She closed her fingers around the key. The city hummed below them. Nasara stood next to Ryuken Voss, the man the streets feared and the ledgers concealed and the silence obeyed, and she felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was standing exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because she had stopped seeing clearly, but because she had seen clearly all of it, every complicated and unclean and genuine part of it, and she had chosen to stay. That, her grandmother would have said, is what love actually is, not blindness, not rescue, not transformation. Just choosing honestly, with both eyes open. If this story pulled you in from start to finish, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Your support keeps these channel alive. See you in the next story.